In the last few years, people have filmed moments that seem almost impossible. A plane hanging motionless over traffic, clouds repeating across the horizon like copied files, strangers freezing on crowded sidewalks as if their instructions stopped loading, a mirror that seems to answer half a second too late. Some of these moments have simple explanations. Others may only be missing context. Wind, perspective, compression, coincidence. The strange, unreliable machinery of human memory. But when the same kinds of errors appear in different places, recorded by different people, under different conditions, a deeper question begins to form. Why does reality sometimes look less like nature and more like a system under stress? This is not proof that the world is artificial. It is a journey through 10 modern glitches that made people question what they saw, what they remembered, and what they believed was solid. Because the mystery is not only in the footage, it is in the feeling the footage leaves behind. That quiet hesitation, that sense that something loaded wrong, arrived late, repeated when it should have been unique. And the final glitch may be the most unsettling one of all, because it does not happen in the sky. It does not happen in a mirror. It happens inside your own mind. The first glitch hides in plain sight. In parking lots, train stations, and crowded rooms. 4 identical cars in the same row. 3 strangers on the same bench wearing nearly the same jacket. A line of houses painted the same tired color, standing under the same gray afternoon light. There is nothing impossible about any of it. Cars are mass-produced. Fashion moves in waves. Cities compress thousands of similar choices into the same streets, the same stations, the same waiting rooms. But the strange feeling comes from timing. When duplicated things appear in the same frame at the same moment, arranged almost too neatly, the world can briefly resemble a digital environment. In games, designers reuse assets because endless uniqueness is expensive. One chair becomes a cafe, one car becomes traffic, one face becomes a crowd. And modern life has trained us to recognize that shortcut. So when reality repeats itself too cleanly, the mind catches the pattern before reason can explain it away. We know it is probably coincidence. We know there are factories, trends, supply chains, and statistical odds behind the repetition. Still, the image stays with us. The detail people keep returning to is not always the object itself. It is the placement, the timing, the uncomfortable feeling that the frame was arranged before anyone stepped into it. A parking lot becomes a file folder. A crowd becomes a copied layer. The ordinary begins to look assembled. This does not mean the world is copied, but it does raise a quieter question. How much of what we call normal is built from repetition we usually fail to notice? And once you start seeing repeated assets on the ground, the next place you look is much harder to ignore. The sky. The sky is supposed to be chaotic. Clouds drift. They tear apart. They stretch, dissolve, and reform. They are shaped by wind and temperature, by pressure and moisture, by forces too large to see and too complex to predict perfectly. That is part of their beauty. No cloud should feel like a duplicate. And yet, every now and then, someone looks up and sees the same cloud repeated across the horizon, like a file dragged and copied across an empty screen. The shapes are not just similar. They appear spaced with a strange rhythm. One cloud echoes the next, until the horizon begins to resemble a pattern instead of weather. Sometimes the formations appear in rows, like tiles. Sometimes they hang over a flat horizon with spacing that feels almost measured. The eye follows the repetition before the mind can find a reason for it. The mainstream explanation is not mysterious. The atmosphere can create rows of clouds, wave formations, cloud streets, and repeating bands when wind, moisture, and pressure align in the right way. Nature is capable of order. In fact, nature often produces patterns more elegant than anything designed by hand. But what makes these images hard to shake is how modern they feel. To an earlier generation, repeating clouds might have looked like signs, symbols, or omens. To us, they look like rendering. They look like a skybox. a background built from repeated pieces to save memory. Maybe that says more about us than it does about the atmosphere. Still, when the largest surface we can see begins to look copied, the question changes. If the sky can seem duplicated, what else might be loading only when we notice it? This is the glitch almost everyone has experienced, but almost no one can prove. You put your keys on the table. You remember the small metal sound they made. You remember the angle of your hand. You remember thinking, with complete confidence, that you would leave them right there. Then they are gone. You check the table once, then twice. You search the couch, the counter, the coat pocket, the bag you have already checked. At first it is irritating. Then it becomes something stranger, because the memory feels too clear to be wrong. Sometimes another person checks the same place and finds nothing. Sometimes you empty the same bag twice. Sometimes the missing object returns to a spot that had already been searched, ordinary and silent, as if it had never left. And then, minutes later, the keys are back. Not somewhere nearby. Not under a paper. Back where they were supposed to be, resting in plain sight as if nothing unusual ever happened. The simulation metaphor calls this despawning. An object vanishes from the active world, then respawns when the system corrects itself. It is a simple idea, almost childish. But anyone who has lived through the moment understands why it survives. Skeptics have a stronger explanation. Attention is fragile. Memory is not a recording. It is a reconstruction. Under stress, the brain can look directly at an object and fail to register it. It can also remember an intention as if it were an action. But the reason this glitch feels so personal is emotional. The person experiencing it does not feel forgetful. They feel corrected, as if the world made a small mistake, noticed it, and quietly put the object back before anyone could prove it had gone missing. The unsettling part is not that someone stops walking. People pause for countless reasons. They receive bad news. They lose their train of thought. They become tired, distracted, overwhelmed, or briefly unsure of where they are going. A stranger's stillness may have a private explanation no camera can see. But some clips feel different. A person freezes in the middle of a sidewalk while the crowd flows around them. Someone turns, stops, repeats the same motion, then resets as if following a broken route. A man walks into a glass door, steps back, and tries again with the same blank persistence. Online, people often call this an NPC glitch, borrowing from the language of video games. It is an imperfect term, and often an unfair one. Real people are not background characters. A few seconds of footage cannot tell us the whole story of a life. Still, the comparison is powerful because the behavior resembles something we recognize from artificial worlds. Pathfinding failure. In a game, a character can become trapped against an obstacle, loop through the same motion, or stand motionless when its instructions break. The world around it continues, but the figure stops making sense. The official explanation is usually simple. Missing context, fatigue, intoxication, stress, illness, editing. Ordinary behavior captured from an odd angle. But one detail remains uncomfortable. Modern cities already ask us to move like code. Wait here, cross now, scan this, follow the route, repeat tomorrow. Maybe the glitch is not that people look programmed. Maybe it is that modern life sometimes does. A passenger jet is not supposed to look still. It is too large, too heavy, too committed to motion. Even when it moves slowly across the sky, we understand what we are seeing. Lift, thrust, distance, direction. The aircraft belongs to a world of forces. That is why the frozen plane videos feel so wrong. The cars below are moving. The camera is moving. Streetlights pass in the foreground. The road keeps unspooling beneath the windshield. But above the traffic, the plane appears locked in place, pinned against the clouds like an object paused in a game engine. What makes the clip linger is the contradiction inside the frame. The foreground has speed. The highway has direction. The traffic has rhythm. But the aircraft, the largest and heaviest thing in the scene, seems detached from all of it. The official explanation is usually perspective. A strong headwind can reduce a plane's ground speed during approach. A moving car can create a parallax effect. With no nearby reference points in the sky, motion becomes harder to judge. The mind expects the aircraft to cross the frame quickly, but distance and wind can make that movement almost invisible. Skeptics are probably right in many cases, and still, the image is difficult to forget, because the eye understands the contradiction before the mind corrects it. Everything below obeys time. Everything above seems to wait. In digital worlds, physics can be one of the first things to look wrong when a system struggles. Objects hover. Motion freezes. Gravity feels delayed. This does not mean gravity failed over a highway, but for a few seconds the footage makes an ancient law of nature feel negotiable. And that is enough to leave a mark. A mirror is supposed to answer instantly. Raise your hand and the reflection obeys. Turn your head and the person in the glass turns with you. The agreement is so immediate that we almost never think about it. That is why a delayed reflection, even for a fraction of a second, changes the room. Some clips appear to show mirrors responding late. A hand moves before the reflected hand follows. A face shifts, and the image seems to hesitate. The delay may last only a few frames, but it is enough to disturb something deep in the viewer. The fear is not simply that the mirror lies. The fear is that the mirror answers late. The mainstream explanation is usually technical. Frame rate, rolling shutter, compression, editing, lighting, glass layers. The strange way digital cameras capture motion in slices, then compress those slices into something that looks continuous. In many cases, that explanation is almost certainly correct. But the mirror is not just another object. It is one of the ways we confirm ourselves. We stand before it every morning expecting proof that the body and the image still agree. So when the image appears to lag, it suggests a tiny separation between the self and the world's response. In digital environments, delayed textures and reflections can happen when a surface exists before its image fully loads. The surface is there. The visual truth arrives late. That is why mirror glitches feel so intimate. A cloud can repeat. A plane can freeze. A stranger can pause in the street. But when the mirror hesitates, the glitch seems to be looking back. Until now, most of the glitches have needed a witness with eyes. But then the errors stop looking visual. They begin to sound like something is wrong. A metallic groan rolls over a quiet town. A trumpet-like tone hangs above sleeping streets. A deep vibration moves through the air, low enough to be felt in the chest before the mind can decide what it is. People step outside and look up, but the sky gives them nothing back. Reports of strange atmospheric sounds have circulated for years. Some are called skyquakes. Others are described as booms, hums, roars, or distant mechanical cries. In some accounts, many people hear the sound at once, yet no clear source is found in the moment. The official explanations are varied. Sonic booms, distant industry, weather, seismic activity, aircraft, explosions far beyond the visible horizon. Sound waves can bend through layers of air and travel in ways that make their origin difficult to locate. Skeptics argue that most sky sounds are not mysterious once context is restored. But sound has a different power than image. A strange image stays in front of us. A strange sound enters us. It passes through walls, windows, ribs, and memory. It turns a neighborhood into a listening room. For a few seconds, strangers become witnesses to the same invisible event. To people raised around digital failures, these noises can resemble audio clipping, as if some enormous sound file triggered at the wrong time. Maybe the cause is ordinary, but when the world sounds broken even briefly, the silence afterward feels less certain. Some places on Earth do not look ancient. They look unfinished. A ridge cuts the horizon with angles too clean. A frozen surface breaks into polygons so precise it resembles a digital mesh. Columns of stone rise in repeating patterns, and a desert landscape suddenly looks less like wilderness than a map before the textures loaded. The official explanation is geology. And geology is already strange enough. Basalt can cool into columns, ice can fracture into geometric plates, salt flats can crack into repeating cells. Wind and water can carve stone into shapes that appear deliberate, even when no hand has touched them. Crystals grow according to internal rules. Pressure and time can create order from chaos. There is no need to invent a digital world to explain natural geometry. And yet the feeling persists. Nature is supposed to be irregular, or at least that is how we imagine it. We expect curves, erosion, asymmetry, mess. When we find cliffs, ice, stone, or desert arranged in hard lines and repeating forms, the modern mind reaches for a modern comparison. Low-poly terrain, unrendered maps, a world reduced to its simplest shapes. The science explains the shape. It does not always explain the feeling. The contradiction is not scientific. It is emotional. The explanation may be solid, but the appearance still feels artificial. Perhaps these landscapes disturb us because they reveal something we forget. Nature is not the opposite of structure. Nature is structure, repeated at scales too large and too small for us to hold in one thought. Still, standing before a place that looks unfinished, one question quietly remains. Are we seeing design, or only the mind's hunger to find it? A false memory is easy to dismiss when it belongs to one person. It becomes harder when thousands or even millions remember the same wrong detail. A logo appears different from how people swear it once looked. A movie line never existed in the form everyone repeats. A childhood brand is remembered with a missing symbol, a changed spelling, a color that was never there. The record says one thing. Memory insists on another. This is often called the Mandela Effect. And it may be one of the most haunting modern glitches because it does not depend on a strange video or a rare atmospheric condition. It lives in ordinary minds. The mainstream explanation is strong. Memory is reconstructive. People absorb parodies, jokes, advertisements, conversations, and misquotations. A phrase repeated incorrectly for decades can become more familiar than the original. The brain favors meaning over precision. Culture quietly edits the archive. Skeptics argue that there is no mystery here, only shared error. But shared error is still strange. When many people remember the same incorrect thing with deep confidence, it feels less like forgetting and more like residue. As if some earlier version of the world was overwritten, but fragments remained in the users who had already loaded it. As a metaphor, the Mandela Effect feels like database corruption, different people carrying pieces of a record that no longer matches the official file. This does not prove a shifting timeline, but it reveals something just as unsettling. The past we carry may not be a photograph. It may be a living document, constantly revised while still feeling true. The final glitch does not need a camera. It arrives quietly, in a room you swear you have already entered, during a sentence you feel you have already heard. A hand reaches for a glass. A curtain moves in the afternoon light. Someone says a simple phrase, and suddenly the present carries the texture of memory. Déjà vu lasts only a few seconds. But while it is happening, time feels folded. The mind knows this moment is new, and yet another part of the mind insists it has already happened. Not vaguely, not symbolically. It feels specific, immediate, almost physical, as if the next second has already been stored somewhere and is now being replayed. The unsettling thing is how private it is. A plane can be filmed, a cloud can be photographed, a sound can be recorded. But déjà vu leaves almost nothing behind. No proof, no witness, no visible mark. Only the person standing there suddenly certain that the present has already passed through them once before. Researchers often explain déjà vu through memory and timing. The brain may briefly tag a new experience as familiar. Signals may arrive slightly out of sync. Fatigue, stress, attention, and neurological patterns may all play a role. The mainstream view does not require alternate timelines or broken reality. And still, the experience remains difficult to reduce. Because déjà vu is not just a thought. It is a sensation of impossible recognition. In simulation language, it can feel like system lag, an old segment of experience briefly reloading before the next one appears. The comparison is only a metaphor, but it captures the emotional truth of the moment. Every glitch before this one occurred somewhere outside us. Clouds, planes, mirrors, streets, sounds, landscapes, records. But déjà vu turns the entire mystery inward. If reality ever stuttered, would we see it in the world first, or would we feel it in time? By the time we reach the end of these cases, a pattern begins to emerge. The earliest glitches seem external. Repeated cars, copied clouds, objects that appear to vanish. Strange behavior in public spaces. A plane that seems pinned to the sky. A mirror that feels a fraction late. But then the mystery widens. A sound with no source becomes a shared event. A landscape looks like unfinished geometry. A memory spreads across millions of people even when the record disagrees. Finally, déjà vu brings the question into consciousness itself. The escalation matters because it changes what we are really asking. At first, the question appears simple. Did something strange happen outside us? But by the end, the question becomes harder. How much of reality do we actually receive directly? We do not see the world as raw truth. We see it through light, distance, expectation, memory, attention, emotion, and time. Each layer helps us survive. Each layer also introduces distortion. This is why the simulation metaphor has become so powerful. It gives modern language to an ancient uncertainty. Once, people spoke of dreams, omens, spirits, or fate. Today, we speak of rendering, lag, corrupted files, and broken code. The metaphor changes, but the human feeling remains. Something happens. It does not fit. And for a moment, the world seems to reveal the outline of a system we cannot fully inspect. There is a danger in calling everything a glitch. If we do it too easily, we stop listening to the ordinary explanations that often matter most. A person standing still in a crowd may be exhausted, grieving, lost, or unwell. A strange sound may have a source beyond the horizon. A missing object may reveal more about attention than reality. Mystery without humility becomes noise, but skepticism without wonder can become blind in its own way. The most honest position may be the space between them, a place where practical explanations can exist beside the feeling that something still does not quite fit. A frozen plane can be perspective and still look impossible. A repeated cloud can be weather and still feel designed. A false memory can be psychology and still reveal how unstable the past becomes once it lives inside culture. Maybe these modern glitches do not prove that reality is artificial. Maybe they prove that reality is more layered than our daily confidence allows. We are creatures of pattern. We notice repetition before randomness. We search for agency in shapes, sounds, coincidences, and memory. Sometimes that instinct misleads us. Sometimes it helps us notice what others overlook. The question is not whether we should believe every strange clip. The question is whether our certainty is always deserved. Because the world may not need to be fake in order to be deeply, quietly unresolved. After all 10 glitches, the strangest possibility may not be that the universe is fake. It may be that reality is real, but our access to it is incomplete. We see through eyes that can be fooled by distance and light. We hear through air that can bend sound across miles. We remember through minds that revise the past while making the revision feel certain. And we experience time from inside time, with no way to step outside and check the machinery. So maybe the glitches are not cracks in the world. Maybe they are cracks in the way we receive it. A copied cloud, a frozen aircraft, a missing object, a shared false memory, a moment of déjà vu. Each one reminds us that certainty is more fragile than it feels. This does not prove a simulation. But it does leave one question quietly open. If reality made a mistake tomorrow, would we recognize it? Or would we simply call it ordinary and keep walking? If you have ever seen something that felt out of place, leave it behind as a fragment, not proof, not evidence, just a record of the moment reality felt uncertain. Look closely today. At the sky, the street, the mirror, and the memory you trust without question. Not every mystery is a malfunction. Some are invitations. And perhaps the most important question is not whether the world is running out of memory. It is whether we are still paying attention.